Humanities, Episode 11, The Native Americans. In 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue, or so the poem tells us. In an attempt to find a quick route to Asia, Columbus was employed by King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella. En route, he stumbles upon a previously unknown continent, thereby discovering America. Well, that's the story that most of us are taught to believe, but it's only a partial truth. First, of course, is that the American continent had been discovered many thousands of years ago by those who had become the Native Americans of this land. These cultures already flourished on this continent long before Columbus ever made his voyage. Now, some would argue that Columbus still discovered the land for the Europeans who had previously been unaware of it, but that too is not entirely true. We know that the Vikings had discovered it 500 years earlier. Nordic and Icelandic sagas tell of voyagers that sail from Norway, the Hebrides and Ireland, over to Iceland, and then on to Greenland, and then into what they called Vinland, the Canadian province of Newfoundland. Archaeologists recently have confirmed this with the discovery of a particular site. This is an archaeological site known as Lance au Meadow, which dates to roughly 1000 CE, and it is the earliest confirmed European settlement in the Americas. The saga, they also state that the Vikings traveled towards Baffin Island in search of narwhal, which they sold at very high prices to Europeans, believing that the Vikings had found a land where unicorns existed. Around this time, unicorns became a huge craze throughout Europe and even became Scotland's national symbol. Of course, there is no record of Europeans' presence in Baffin Island, since they only went there to hunt and not to settle. This means that it is perfectly possible that others could have traded but not settled even before this time. But without archaeological evidence, this is mere speculation based on survival in writings. Keep in mind that the Mediterranean Sea, which had been traversed by Europeans for thousands of years, is about 4,000 kilometers from Gibraltar over to Lebanon. Scotland to Greenland is only about 2,800 kilometers. Greenland is about 1,800 kilometers from Canada. So a voyage to the New World would only be about 600 kilometers longer than crossing the Mediterranean, which they have done for a very long time. So it is quite possible. Again, if we look at the map here, we can kind of see the basics. The Mediterranean region, which has been occupied by these Europeans traveling, and again, you can travel all the way from right here at Gibraltar, all the way over through it, right? And so that is only about 600 kilometers less than setting out, let's say, from up here or maybe up into the Hebrides of Scotland, making your way to Iceland and then over to Greenland. And then again, it's not that far over to Baffin Island or down into Newfoundland where Lance au Meadow was established. Now, it's also more than possible that some Europeans knew about the Americas via stories before Columbus's voyage. They were still looking for a quicker route to Asia by traveling west. One knows how vast America was. You know, it was unknown. So how big is it? How far north does it go? How far south does it go? How wide is it? Perhaps there would still be a way around it. So it may not be that they didn't completely know about it when they went looking for Asia, but much like later followers, maybe they were looking for a Northwest Passage. Regardless, when Columbus and others come to this land, they found it populated with people, and they began the process of interaction, initially for trade, but later for settlement. When Europeans came, they found a land with many earthen mounds, some resembling those found in Central and South America, but more reminiscent of the ancient European practices, such as the tumulus-style burial mounds of Ireland, which we see in this depiction here, as well as in this one, which you've seen before. So I want to take you on a journey through the eastern United States to some of the more impressive mound sites that would have been seen by those early explorers. The first Europeans to record mound sightings were members of Hernando de Soto's 1539 to 1540 expedition through Louisiana and Mississippi. So let's start with a trip up the Mississippi. The first site that we would come to would be in present-day Natchez, Mississippi, at what's known as the Grand Village of the Natchez. This is a site that was inhabited from about 700 to 1730 CE. There are 3 remaining mounds on the site, 2 of them holding great significance. We have the Great Sun's Mount, where the chief lived, and the Temple Mount, where a temple was erected containing an eternal flame. So if we look at the images that we have here, this is an artist's rendering of the Temple Mount, where we see the building structure atop it. And this one is kind of a wide view range showing us what the village would have looked like at its height. Here we see present day Natchez Village site, so you can see in the distance a couple of these platform mounds. They're not extremely high like they were depicted in that image before, but they are still fairly decent sized. And this is just another artist's depiction, which again, it kind of makes it seem that it's further higher up than it is, although it could well be because erosion does set in on these sites quite often. About 10 miles away is what's known as Emerald Mound. This is the second largest ceremonial mound in the United States. It covers about 8 acres in size and rises to about 60 feet at its maximum. It's a flat-topped mound, but with 2 smaller mounds on top of it, and this was also built by the Natchez. So we can see the depiction here of the entirety of the site. So there's the flat top ridge up there, and then over here you'll see the secondary mound, or one of the secondary mounds. And there's another angle of it, so you can kind of see with the car sitting there, the height. And this is one of the smaller mounds at the top, and the other. So crossing the Mississippi River into Louisiana, we would come to Poverty Point. Poverty Point is the oldest mound site in North America. The large mound that you're looking at on the screen is over 3,400 years old. Now, roughly about 5,000 people shifted 53 million cubic feet of dirt in order to build this mound. The Poverty Point culture is going to thrive as a pre-agricultural community for about 600 years. And I'll show you just a few more images here of this impressive mound. This is the main mound. There are a lot of smaller ones, but this is the main one. And again, it's unusual because most of the time these mounds are built up over long periods of time, years, decades, even centuries in some cases. This massive mound was constructed in about 3 to 4 months. I take you a little too far in sliding through the slides here, so I'll take you right back. So this is the last one from Poverty Point. Now, if we head up the Mississippi River towards present-day St. Louis, we find Cahokia. Cahokia, in its heyday, roughly about 1200 CE, was the largest metropolis in North America, with a population of averaging around 20,000 people, which means that for that time period it was comparable in size to London or Paris. So it was one of the largest cities in the world in the 1200s. It was the center of a huge trade network that stretched all the way from Wisconsin down into Mexico. And it was a religious center that brought in large numbers of visitors. It was always a swelling and bustling place. Now, a large number of mounds are still preserved here. It is one of the best preserved places to visit, including Monk's Mound. At 100 feet tall, it is the largest pyramid mound in North America. It would have had several buildings on top of it, including a temple and a chief's hut, looking down and over at all of these sites. So the image that you're looking at here, and I'll show you another depiction of it, that is the Monk's Mound. It was referred to as Monk's Mound largely because later, after European contact and the natives had abandoned it, there was a group of monks who took it over and they lived atop it. But in any event, that is, excuse me, that is Monk's Mound at Cahokia. And there we see it again. So in the museum at this site, there are some interesting artifacts, and one of the more interesting ones that I wanted to show you was this, which are bird effigies that are beaten and cut out of copper. Copper we find up along the lakes in Michigan, and it makes its way through this trade network all the way down towards St. Louis. This is some of the other imagery, the pottery and carved stone and things of that nature. And from atop Monk's Mound, looking across, you can see an open plaza. You'll also be able to see two other notable mounds, the first one and this one, and then if we look at the other image, you can see both together. This is what's known here as the twin mounds. You'll see the one over on this side and the other one over here. And this image will show you that at the very top of Monk's Mound, if you look off to the side, you're only about 13 kilometers away from the city of St. Louis itself. So it was very close to the river, and originally it would have stretched and incorporated both sides of the river, but of course the city has grown up on the other side. If we cut over to Evansville, Indiana, we can take a look at Angel Mound, which is another Mississippian culture site active from 1100 to 1450 CE, which means that its population would have interacted with that of Cahokia. The central mound of the site, Mound A, is 44 feet tall with a base of 644 by 335 feet in height. And you're looking at it, of course, here in this depiction, and there again in this one. Again, within the museum, you'll see some interesting examples of the type of pottery and artwork that would have been found at Angel Mound. If we continue our trip eastward into Ohio, we'll see one of the world's best known effigy mounds, what's known as Serpent Mound. The serpent is 1,348 feet long and roughly about 4 feet tall. It was built as a sacred site and used for ceremonies by the Adena culture, but later radiocarbon dating says that actually this was constructed about 1100 CE. So archaeologists have sort of changed their mind on this particular issue. So with that later date, this actually makes it part of the Fort Ancient culture rather than the Adena culture. But again, if we look at the images here, you can see the twisting and winding back and forth of the serpent's body. This is at the very head of it. And if you see this, this is supposed to be the concept here. So there's the round head up at the top, right? And perhaps an open mouth, perhaps a tongue. We don't really know, but that was the depiction there. And then down at the other end, you see the swirl. This is the tail. This is the end of it, making that spiral. And some more images of the winding, which you see there. For the last two sites, we're going to head down to Georgia. First up is Etowah, which is near Cartersville, Georgia. There are 6 earthen mounds and an open plaza. This was home to members of the Mississippian culture there from about 1000 to about 1550 CE. The tallest of the mounds is about 63 feet tall. There are also several interesting artifacts that have been found that help us to understand this site and its culture. And so we'll just share with you a few of these images here so that you're able to see the size of the large mounds, of course, again, with the flat tops. And then inside the museum, you'll see again some of the artistry of what has been constructed there. These effigy head figures and a ceremonial mask. And these are fascinating. These all seated, kneeling figures. They are several feet tall, actually. They're considerably larger than you might think that what they are. But they were found buried in graves, kind of looking over and watching over the bodies. And so finally, we'll end our journey near Macon, Georgia, at a site called Ocmulgee. The site's been occupied here for over 12,000 years, and although the mounds themselves were likely not built until around 1000 CE, so they are comparable to those of Etowah. The largest of the mounds is the Great Temple Mound, which is about 55 feet tall. One of the interesting features about this is that Ocmulgee seems to be the only site that has preserved what are called earth lodges, one of which is actually open to the public, so you can go in. And when you do so, and I'll show you the image here in just a little bit, notice the effigy eagle and the carved individual seats for prominent members of the tribe. And so if we look out, again, we'll see the images of these great mighty mounds. And once again, from atop the largest mound, looking over here, you can see the skyline of the city of Macon, Georgia. So you're very close to the city within that. Now, this is one of those earth lodges that I had mentioned. You'll notice that it is, carved from the earth itself, the mound there, and then there's the entranceway to where you can go in. And then once you're inside, you can notice here is that eagle that I was talking about earlier. It's designed there in that effigy form. And then it's harder to see, but over along the sides, there are these little carved seating spots that are there for, again, tribal members, priests, and whatnot. And finally, again, if we go inside the museum, you'll be able to see a number of artifacts that have been preserved from the excavations there. One of the cultures that comes around is what's known as the Lamar culture. And these are little carved head figures from that Lamar culture. And there is a very impressive stone bird pipe. And chunky stones. In the open plazas that you find at all of the sites, there were games that were played, there were tests of skill, there were training exercises, but one of the favorite games was chunky. And these are chunky stones which were used to be sort of rolled down, and then you'll notice some of them have these holes in there. Can you throw a spear through the hole? That becomes one of the central questions. And finally, this last little bit of pottery that you see. Now, on the Moral World YouTube page, you're going to find that there are several videos that work like a field trip. They'll actually take you to these some of these sites, specifically Monk's Mound at Cahokia, Serpent Mound in Ohio, and one we didn't look at here, which is on the Shiloh battlefield site in Tennessee. But these will act sort of like field trips and give you a chance to see them as if you're on site, hear about more detail than what this brief overview is able to give you. Now, of course, there's a lot of other sites that haven't survived the plow, but I would definitely encourage you to seek out these sites that do remain and learn about their fascinating history for yourself. So now you've had a chance to see much of what the Europeans who came to this land saw, and that is really that dotting all throughout the landscape of North and Central America, there's a wide variety of these earthen mounds. As you've seen, there's different sizes and shapes. Some are as tall as an 8-story building, others considerably smaller. Some are animal effigies, others are square, circular, or oblong mountains of dirt. Some stand alone, while others are part of large complexes. Why were these mounds built? Who built them? These questions have been the source of many debates and excavations and conjectures. The real story of these mounds goes back centuries before European explorers ever set foot upon these shores. But what is perhaps just as interesting are the attempts that were made by Europeans to try to understand them. The first known account of the phenomenon came from a member of De Soto's crew in 1539. Entering a native town called Uquita, it was observed. The town was of 7 or 8 houses, built of timber and covered with palm leaves. The chief's house stood near the beach upon a very high mound, made by hand for defense. In the other end of the town was a temple, on the top of which was perched a wooden fowl with gilded eyes. In this account, we can recognize a common theme of the early native villages, the chief's mound. The mounds allowed for a hierarchical society. In the villages, the chief's mound was the highest. This gave him dominion and visibility over the whole village, as well as protection. Lesser chiefs, shamans, or noble villagers might occupy lower mounds, while the general population built their huts on ground level. A good example of this hierarchical structure can be found at Etowah Mounds in Bartow County, Georgia. One common misconception to be dispelled here is that all mounds have religious significance, in other words, are burial mounds. At Etowah, for example, only the priest's mound was a burial mound, and excavations have yielded a wonderful array of artifacts to interest the historian and the religion scholar. But not all mounds had religious significance, nor do we have a complete picture of the religion of these mound builders. History, however, has left us a substitute. From the earliest discoveries, Europeans could not accept that the ancestors of the modern Indian races were the ones that were responsible. Instead, many elaborate myths emerged concerning the lost race of mysterious mound builders. In the 17th and the 18th centuries, many texts, including one from William Penn, were written in an attempt to prove that the mound builders were actually the lost tribes of Israel who had made their way to the American shores. Caleb Atwater's account argued that the mound builders were a non-Indian race from Asia who came to these shores around the time of Abraham. Many priests argued that America was the land where Noah's Ark came to rest, and so the mounds were constructed as part of God's plan to rebuild. J.W. Foster argued that the mound builders were dull-witted Neanderthals who constructed the mounds to honor their Chinese overlords. Ignatius Donnelly went so far as to claim that the mound builders were survivors from the lost continent of Atlantis. William Pigeon declared that Adam was the first to build the mounds, followed by Noah. He goes on to declare that the Marietta earthworks were constructed by the Romans, the Wisconsin mounds by the Danes, the Saxons, and the Belgians. Still other mounds, he says, are constructed by Phoenicians, Hindus, and Africans. In short, Pigeon, like many others, was willing to argue that large numbers of people came to America before Columbus. Anything was preferable to them to admitting that the present native people were responsible. Perhaps the most elaborate myth came from Joseph Smith, the founder of Mormonism. Smith claimed that in 1820, when he was 15, he saw a vision of Jesus which warned him to reject all religions. 3 years later, the angel Moroni spoke to him and said that there was a book deposited, written upon gold plates, giving an account of the former inhabitants of this continent and the source from which it sprang. The fullness of the everlasting gospel is contained in it, as is delivered by the Savior to the ancient inhabitants. So in 1827, Smith supposedly found these tablets and translated them. In 1830, the 588-page Book of Mormon was the result of this effort. Now, after this time, the tablets were returned to Moroni, and no human has ever seen them since. In the Book of Mormon, which begins around the 6th century BCE, Nephi of Jerusalem recounts the biblical story of Babel. However, according to this version, settlers from the Near East, led by Jared, were sent across the sea to America. Here they built cities and grew in number. Civil war divided them, and their houses became heaps of earth upon the face of the land. Supposedly, an historian called Ether transcribed these events on the golden tablets, and he makes the prediction that new settlers will come to establish a new Jerusalem. Later, during the time of Nephi, a group of Jews escaped from the Babylonian destruction. This group, led by Nephi's father, cross over the Atlantic Ocean, and they settle in America, where they begin to prosper until civil war erupts between the Nephites, who were a rich agricultural group, and the Lamanites, who were described as ungodly savages. In order to punish the Lamanites, God turned their skin red in color, and thus were created the American Indians. The Nephites, who were the mound builder race, became corrupt and were destroyed by God using the Lamanites. After a huge battle called the Battle of Cumorah in 401 CE, only one historian survived to pass on the tale. That historian was called Mormon, the father of Moroni, who hid the story away until it was rediscovered by Joseph Smith. All of this speculation comes to an end in the 1880s, when John Wesley Powell was chosen to head up the Smithsonian Bureau of Ethnology, and you see him over on this side. The original purpose of the Bureau was to study the language and the culture of the present-day native peoples. He had no interest in pursuing archaeology or in studying the mound builder culture. To his mind, mound builders were just ancestors of the present native races. He further argued that we should stop looking for a single lost mound builder culture. In his report, Powell argued, "The wide extent and vast number of mounds discovered in the U.S. should lead us to suspect at least the mound builders of prehistoric times belonged to many and diverse stock." A group of archaeologists persuaded Congress to allocate $25,000 to the Bureau, $5,000 of which was required to be invested in further study of the mound builder culture. In 1881, Powell chose Cyrus Thomas, who's the individual we see here, Cyrus Thomas to lead up this division. In time, Thomas would become known as the Slayer, of the mound builder myth. Now, if you'd like to know more about the mound builders, I recommend a book by Robert Silverberg called The Mound Builders, which was published in 1970. There's also a more recent work written by an individual called Calavito called The Mound Builders Myth. And those are two excellent places to start. But I'm going to go ahead and stop at this point, and in the next lecture, we're going to take a look at one very specific native tribe, the Lakota, and learn a little bit about their culture and specifically an individual called Black Elk.